What is up? Just going to give kind of an overview of how I tackled third year, what my experience was like, what I did to study for the end of rotation exams, the COMAT, how I studied for USMLE Step 2 and COMLEX Level II, and kind of just how I approached this year overall. So just quickly before we start, these are my own opinions. This doesn't represent the views of my school or any type of affiliate rotation, anything like that. It's not a must-do guide. Again, this is just solely my experience, what I found helpful, and what I did and the results that I got. People have done other things and they have done as well or better. So you definitely don't have to do just this. You can do variations of this, but again, this is just my experience that I'm going to share with you today. Okay, some topics going to go over, just scores for reference, the resources I use, what my timeline looked like, rotation example that I use for every rotation, kind of how to break it down on one slide, and practice test schedule for USMLE and COMLEX, what I thought about the exams, when I took the exams, kind of the reasons why I took them when I did, days leading up to the exam, actual test day, and anything I would have done differently, and some other random stuff thrown in between. Okay, so here are my scores for reference. So on USMLE Step 2, I scored over a 265, COMLEX Level 2 over a 755, and then I've also put my COMATs down here. And the way these COMATs are scored, there's an average of 100, a standard deviation of 10, so the hundreds are the average, and then one standard deviation above is 110, one below is 90. This is kind of how I did on each one of these. And just important to note here, surgery, I did not use the plan I'm going to go through in this video. I was kind of doing my own thing, going through questions nonchalantly, la-di-da, I felt terrible, like super unprepared. Definitely don't recommend it. Definitely recommend having a plan, whether it's this plan or a variation of this plan, to kind of approach systematically. And all the other ones, after I started doing what I'm going to talk about in this video, showed in my scores, I started improving. I started feeling more confident about questions and these tests. I wasn't aiming for a specific score. I mean, obviously I was trying to do as well as I could, but it's not like it was make or break. Like I needed, 120 or above on these. I kind of just gave it my best shot. Just used it to gauge, where I was with the specific rotation. If I needed to come back to anything during the dedicated months, that this plan it's good for both boards and the COMATs. What I would say just quickly before we move on is, I approached each one of these rotations like a mini board exam. So, I studied for IM like it was going to be a board exam. I really tried to master it before moving on. And I think that's the key to Step 2 and Level 2 is if you kind of attack these all as their separate entity, as a board exam and try and do your best and really master the material in each of these subjects, come dedicated and come time to take Step 2, Level 2, you're going to be fine. The bulk of your studying is going to be done during these rotations in preparation for these end of rotation exams. And just some other things to mention, the high yield stuff for COMLEX first was definitely IM, hands down, OBGYN, pediatrics, and of course OMEM. So, and that was pretty much the same for USMLE, except USMLE was IM, surgery, OBGYN, and I guess a little bit of peds too. Those were kind of the ones I felt like I was answering a lot of my questions on. So the resources I used, so this approach here, I really feel that less is more, right? Just pick three, I would say a max of three things. I wouldn't go crazy. I wouldn't buy everything. I wouldn't buy multiple banks. I wouldn't do, anything more than three total resources. The ones that I use and I highly recommend is first off, UWorld, hands down. That was my bulk. That was what I used to study during the rotations. Second thing, which I really recommend, CMS forms that the NVMe has, and I'll show you a video later of how to get to these exactly and how to purchase them. But there's 27 of them and they're $20 each. It comes out to $540, which is kind of a lot, but I think seriously, it's way better than getting like Amboss. I definitely don't recommend getting Conquest. We'll talk more about that after. But I recommend doing UWorld and then buying this. Shell out the $540 for these exams. It's totally worth it. It's written by the NBME, which are the people who write Step 2. So I think it's super beneficial. And these were good for the COMATs, and it was good for COMLEX too, because the best COMLEX preparation is actually preparation for USMLE, in my opinion, with some sprinkling of OMM in there. So definitely recommend the CMS forums. And if you can't do them all for whatever reason, whether it's money, whether it's just time, I would still try and do at least something from all the subjects, but we'll talk about this on the next slide. You can cut some subjects out that are lower yield. And then the third thing, hands down, Anki. I've been a big Anki guy from first year of medical school and even to this point, I was using the On King deck. But the thing is, if you're coming from On King for step one, the step one cards are fantastic. The step two cards are good too, but there's just a lot of them. And then there's a decent amount that I didn't find super helpful. So what I did is I started making my own cards with the Bro DO deck. I made all my own cards for the CMS forms, for UWorld, and like some other random stuff like UWise, OBGYN. And I also included all the On King Step 2 cards for the subjects that I thought was relevant, separately tagged by rotation. And I also included some Step 1 UWorld cards I made that were relevant to Step 2, and some Step 1 micro and farm stuff also in that deck. And you could also, the thing with if you use the Bro DO deck, which I'm going to release and email out to everybody, is that you can use this deck and it's taken a lot of the heavy lifting away. You can just use the cards that are there and just modify them if you want, or just use them completely and kind of go off of what I did. But yeah, a lot of the bulk work is done. And you can also create your own cards if you don't like some of mine or all of mine, whatever. But I definitely recommend using Anki for spaced repetition and keeping these things relevant throughout the year. And then one last thing on UWorld, this is not like step one where like your percent really matters, at least in my opinion. Just use this solely as a learning tool. As long as you're learning from the questions and taking something away from the questions, I wouldn't care about your overall percent too much. And this is it right here. This is hands down your key. These are your three best friends for all of third year: UWorld, Anki, MBME, and you'll do just fine with those. What this is here is these are all the MBME forms I was talking about. These are the CMS forms over here, and these are the MBME like step 2 practice tests. The CMS forms, they're all 50 questions each. I took them all timed under like testing conditions, turn my phone off, whatever, no distractions. And this just shows you how many forms there are for each subject. So you can see most of them have 4, stuff like emergency, family med, only have 2, psych only has 3. I hands down recommend doing all 4 IMs, all 4 OBs, all 4 peds, all 4 surgeries. The rest you can kind of pick and choose if you really need to cut some out. I mean, I highly recommend doing them all. I found them all useful, and I made Anki cards for them all, which you can review after you take them. You can cut from neuro. I mean, our school, we don't have a neuro rotation, so I would highly consider doing all 4 of them. If you needed to, you probably get away with like 2. Then there wasn't too much neuro on either of my exams, but 2 is probably good. Again, I'd recommend doing all these. Psych was super low yield. I think between both tests, I only had like 5 questions total or something like that. So you could probably just do one of these if you want. Family med, I would do 2. An emergency, I guess it's not technically a subject on step 2, but a lot of the IM questions felt emergent. It's like someone presenting to the emergency department or something you have to act. So I'd definitely recommend laying eyes on at least one. Again, I'd recommend doing all of these, and I would do all these on your rotation, which we'll talk about later, because doing all these, if you divide these up by rotation, you do them on the rotation, it's going to go by and it's not going to be too bad. And it will prep you again, like taking that mini board exam just for that subject that I recommended. So that's kind of what's going on with the CMS forms. The step 2 side of things, these are all the practice exams for step 2 that the MBME has. So they have like 3 step 2 forms. There's an old free 120, which I can include in that email that we'll talk later about the order, but I recommend starting with that one. It's not super as relevant anymore, but it was still good to see MBME questions. And then the new free 120, which was really good. I recommend taking that one at Prometric. And again, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so for DO students, it's the same thing as all the slides above. The only thing you're going to do differently is you're going to add TrueLearn or Conquest. So your school should provide one of these. Our school provides TrueLearn. If it's not provided, I don't recommend buying one of these. I mean, you can if you want, but I don't recommend shelling out the money. What I would do is I would just get like maybe a 1 or 2 month subscription or 3 month subscription, like whatever they sell them in, like before COMLEX 2, solely just to see some OMM questions. That's really it. Other than that, you can do this thing called these practice COMAT questions, the MBME. It's this website right here. Again, I can include this in the email. There's just 10 free questions for every single COMAT. It kind of gives you an idea of what the exam looks like, what the highlighting is like, some sample questions. You can do this if you want. I know some people who did and they liked it. Personally, I didn't really use it that much, but it's there. So what I did post step 1 is I just kept up with the On King reviews that had the step 2 tags. So the step 1 cards that had the step 2 tags. And again, I tagged them in the Bro DO deck, so you can just start fresh with that deck if you want. But that's all I did. I kind of just relaxed until the rotation started. And this is what my rotation schedule looked like. My schedule was weird as I started with an IM and I also ended with an IM. So I didn't have a COMAT here. I had the COMAT at the end of this month. So pretty much what I did in between, like from IM all the way to surgery, I was just doing like some IM questions, random ambulatory medicine, EM, stuff like that. I wasn't studying too hard. So this I almost took almost completely off. I was doing something like ridiculous, like 10 questions a day or something like that. Really not studying that much. Come surgery though, and actually a little bit before surgery, I started doing surgery questions like maybe like midway through the ICU block, which I don't recommend you do. I don't recommend you do any type of rotation questions before the actual rotation. I would just keep these separate. You can start doing Anki cards for rotations leading up to that rotation, but you don't have to. But definitely I wouldn't recommend doing any questions or any CMS forms before you start the actual rotation, just to keep everything consistent and kind of fully dive into it for that month. So pretty much what I did come to this vacation block is I did all of the questions except family med and psych. All IM, all peds, OB, all the forms I didn't do, I kind of made up for right here. The reason I took step 2 and COMLEX level 2 a little early is because this second IM rotation where I was is known to be a little bit more time consuming. Okay, so this is an example rotation. So we're going to do the pediatric rotation, which is one of the more time intensive ones, definitely more of a workload of a rotation, questions and study wise. So we're going to use this as an example. And this is what I did for every single rotation. I kind of wrote this out on a piece of paper. We're going to use 30 days, but use however many days you have, whether it's 28, 30, whatever. So you just count the number of days you have on that rotation, and then you start tallying everything up. You start taking an inventory, right, of stuff you want to get through, questions, tests, Ankis, whatever. So first I knew I had 4 MBME tests. So I knew I had to do at least 1 per week to get through them all in 4 weeks. I'm going to show you what this looks like on another slide. I took the total number of UWorld questions, which was 612, I think at the time, and I divided that by 29 because I wanted to finish the day before the COMAT. So I had to do 21 UWorld questions a day. And then for DO students only, I took the TrueLearn questions, 238, and I'll show you what to do differently with this. But you're going to want to do all of these questions in the week leading up to the exam. So I did 238 divided by 7. I had to do 34 TrueLearn questions a day starting a week out, or 8 days out. So technically I finished the day before. And then the Anki cards, there was a total of 1586. So I divided again that by 28, and I needed to look at 57 a day. And I'll show you this on an Anki video of how I set it up for my rotation and what I mean by look at. But pretty much you don't have to unsuspend all the cards. You just need to go through at least 57. This is what it would look like, kind of all laid out in one. So you have day 1 where you start the rotation, or you end the other rotation, whatever. And then day 30 is going to be your COMAT or shelf exam. So like we were saying on the previous slide, you had to do 21 UWorlds a day. You'd have to do 57 Anki cards, just look at them a day. And then you were going to have to take 1 MBME a week. And this is where you can kind of change it a little bit. First off, with the UWorld questions, 21 a day, it's not horrible. So like, and especially if you're not working every single day. So like, let's say one day, if you got through 21, you can keep going, you can do 30, and then you're just going to lower your load going through. And then on the weekends too, you can definitely get through probably more than 21 questions a day on the weekends. You could probably double those. So you can tack days off and kind of lessen the load later in the rotation. And then same thing with the MBMEs. I took one once a week. So I did MBME 3, and I took them all on Saturday because I had off on Saturday and Sunday. So I took MBME 3, on one Saturday, then 4 the next one, 5 the next one, then MBME 6. What you could do is, if you don't want to do it that way, what you can do is you can just double them up. So maybe you don't do any for the first 2 weeks, you get some UWorld questions under your belt, and then come the 3rd week, you take MBME 3 and 4 here, back to back. So it's 100 questions because the COMATs are 125 questions. So if you want to take 2 back to back, it would be 100 questions. You can kind of simulate a COMAT. And then maybe the week after that, you take 5 and 6. So that way you still get through 4. But you can do this if you want to simulate more of a real test, work on your stamina, or if you don't think you had enough peds. But I think it's fine. I think you can win a week and you'll be more than fine. And that's the way I did it. And then as you can see here for DO students, so you're going to start 8 days out. from your COMAT. So this last week, what I was doing is I was just doing all the True Learn questions. So True Learn 34, 34, 34, 34, 34, 34, all the way. And this is just because you want to flood yourself with some more. They're not great questions. You know, you just want to kind of lay eyes on them. And a rule of thumb is if it took me, let's see, an hour to do 10 UWorld questions, like fully do them, do the question, review it, make an Anki card, it should take you like an hour to do like 40 or 50 True Learn questions. This, you're not really reviewing in depth. You're just flying through them. You're just doing it. If you got it right, great, move on. If you get it wrong, just look at the educational objective or something and move on. And some of these questions are really wacky, so don't freak out too much. That's what I did just to prepare for the COMAT. Okay, and this was a typical rotation day for me, just on any given rotation. This is going to change a lot depending on what rotation you're on, what your expectations are, what your schedule's like, if it's morning or night, whatever. But this was just a typical day for me, typical weekday, because I had the weekends off on most rotations. So in the morning, I get up anywhere from 4 to 4:30, do some type of exercise. I do that for about an hour. I'd come home, eat breakfast, get ready for the rotation, get all my stuff gathered. And then that would pretty much leave me 45 minutes before I had to leave my house typically to do some UWorld questions. Usually I'd leave, you know, it depends. This was 45 minutes at the minimum. It could be an hour, you know, if the rotation was only 5 minutes from my house, I could just, you know, I'd have more time to do questions. 7:15 was probably the earliest I left for a rotation that was like 30 to 35 minutes away. In the morning, depending how the morning went, I would either get all of my questions done, some of my questions done, and there was times I just didn't get any of them done. So the thing I would do is I would open a set, like for P's, let's say I had to do 21 a day. I would just open a set of 40, right? And I would just know that I had to get through 21, you know, and what I would do is I wouldn't make any Anki cards for them at that time. What I would do is I would answer the question, you know, go through it, read the explanation and the educational objective, and I would just highlight important things. And if it was a question I wanted to come back to in the evening to make an Anki card for, I would just flag it. What you guys can do is you can do questions in the morning. You can unlock from the Bro DO deck as you go, or the Anking deck, whatever you're using, or you can flag it and unlock cards based on them later. But that's how I typically spent my morning. At the rotation, this is going to vary again by rotation, but I typically got there around 8. And some rotations, you're going to have a lot more study time than others. Some of them, you're going to barely have any time to study, any downtime, and others are you're going to have a lot of time. So just as an example, pretty much my game plan for every single rotation was I knew I wasn't going to really be able to get questions done. So what I did is, and I highly recommend you buy the Anki app for your phone. It's 25 bucks for iPhone. I think it's free for Android. And what I would do is in those little pockets of time, I would just take out my phone and do Anki. And those little pockets of time, if you can get 10, it sounds stupid, but if you can get 10 cards done here, you know, 20 cards done there, you know, another 5 here, it lessens your load for later in the day. And I didn't have a lot of reviews to begin with. I think the max I was ever doing was like a little over 300 a day. I was getting most of them done at the rotation site. And that varied, of course, by day. You know, sometimes I would get through all of them, you know, by lunch. Sometimes I wouldn't get through, you know, all of them until the end of the day. Sometimes I only get through, you know, like 50% of them. And then on some days I wouldn't get through any of them. But this was kind of the layout for the rotation. And then depending on the rotation you're on, you might have an hour for lunch, you might have 2 hours for lunch, you might get no lunch. So I did the same thing at lunch. I would try and do Anki cards. Sometimes if I knew I had a full like hour lunch, I would go to the cafeteria or go somewhere quiet, put in headphones, and I would actually do UWorld questions if I didn't get them done already. And then afternoon, same deal as the morning. I would just try and get Ankis done in little pockets of time. And I would come home roughly, you know, this is also going to change, but let's say, you know, get home at 5:30, you know, from 5:30 to 6, I was pretty much just eating dinner, maybe call my family or whatever. And then after I did that from 6 to 8, I put in another like 2 hours of just UWorld questions, reviewing these UWorld questions, making Anki cards, unlocking Anki cards. And I gave myself roughly a half hour, 45 minutes at night to watch TV, unwind. But yeah, it's all gonna vary based on the rotation. So in short, the mornings were for questions, the rotations, I did Anki, and then in the evening, I did more questions. Okay, so now kind of getting into the practice stuff for USMLE and COMLEX. This is the order I take them in, and this is pretty much the order I recommend you taking them in. I started 11 weeks out with the old free 120. Like I said, it's not super predictive, but it's good just to see MBME style questions. And then the next test I had after that was the school ComSay. I took this in January. It was ComSay 107, and I took MBME 9, followed by UWorld 1, MBME 11, MBME 10, UWorld 2, the new free 120, and then I went into USMLE Step 2 and COMLEX Level 2. And what I would change is I would not take UWorld 2 last. I would switch these two. I would take NBME 10 last. This, as you can see, NBME 10 and NBME 11 really predicted my score really well. And that's what I've heard from other friends who have taken it and other people who have taken it. UWorld 2 and UWorld 1, in my opinion, were way harder than the real thing. It didn't really look like the real thing. I thought these were just kind of wacky exams, to be honest. So I recommend seeing NBME questions before you go into an NBME written exam. So I would switch these two. You could do what you want, but that's what I would recommend. The hardest test by far were these two. NBME 9 was extremely weird, so don't freak out whatever score you have on it. And UWorld 1, I mean, I took the first 20 questions. I'm pretty sure at least I thought I got all 20 of them wrong. I thought I was absolutely getting destroyed, which was true to an extent. So don't freak out on these two. They're really tough. And these were hands down my actual tests. My USMLE felt exactly like NBME 10 and 11. It didn't really feel like the new free 120. I also thought this was extremely difficult. And my COMLEX, it hands down 100% felt like COMSA 107, just with videos. That's pretty much it. In short, this felt like USMLE, these two, and this one felt like COMLEX. What I did approaching in between USMLE and COMLEX, I personally took it 2 weeks after USMLE, and that was not because I planned it out that way. I actually had them 1 week apart, but I ended up moving my USMLE up just because I was scoring where I wanted to score, and I was getting a little burnt out, so I decided just to take it. I did not move COMLEX. I recommend sticking with 1 week. I had 2 weeks, and it was actually terrible. I don't recommend it. You know, I was kind of burnt, relaxing, kind of confused, you know, if I should be studying or not. There's not enough material to fill up 2 weeks. There's barely enough material to fill up 1 week. So I highly recommend doing it with 1 week max. You know, maybe if you really want to take some time off, do 10 days, but I recommend taking it within 1 week. And what I would do is, the thing is, the bulk of your studying is going to be done with the USMLE stuff and doing everything for the rotations we already talked about. You know, doing the Anki cards, doing the UWorld questions, doing the NBME forms. The bulk of the test is already done. What you pretty much have to do in this week is you can go through the OMM Anki deck, which you can also go out throughout the year. There's only 743 cards, so it's pretty manageable. If you start like 6 months out, maybe 3 months out, you know, whatever, you can easily get through that. But if you didn't for some reason, which I totally don't blame you, you can just focus on the high yield subdecks. I would say the cranial deck was really helpful, the GI deck, the special tests, ribs and sacrum also. Without a doubt, I recommend doing OMM, the Dirty Medicine OMM playlists, going through his PDF document, and then also watching his bioterrorism video, bioterrorism micro video. There's, you know, that comes up a lot. And then if you have time, not super necessary, but you can go through his insurance and healthcare ethics videos. A lot of the tests is like that now. The third thing I would recommend is doing OMM questions. And again, this is coming back to the bank. You can either do TrueLearn, ComQuest, whatever. I did TrueLearn. I thought it was fine. The OMM, honestly, on the exam is crazy. So I don't really feel like it resembled TrueLearn, but going through the TrueLearn questions and all of this stuff at least gave me a fighting chance on some of these questions. I thought the TrueLearn, I think there's like 250 maybe OMM questions. I went through them once. I think I did the incorrect, or I went through them a second time just quickly. You can look into these other things. I've heard that UWorld has come out with some OMM questions. I haven't heard of anyone using it or what it's like. I've heard people like ComQuest, but I wouldn't spend money on any of these things. Just do whatever your school gives you. If you have some time left over, you're really flying through the OMMs, I would recommend just staying on TrueLearn. I wouldn't do any UWorld in this time. What I would do is I would just do TrueLearn, IM, OB, surgery, and PEDS questions. Again, this is kind of just like almost prepping yourself for the COMATs, like how last week you would just fly through TrueLearn, you know, questions on whatever subject COMAT you were taking. Is the same deal here, just to kind of get a sense and feel those question types. This was my practice exam routine, and this is the exact same thing on test day. So I think what you should do, or at least what I did, is I had a plan I took every practice test like it was the actual test, you know, so I had what I was going to eat. I had what time I was going to wake up. You know, I had everything pretty much lined up, and I was going to do the same thing every time I took a practice test. That way, you know, when you walk into the actual test, it just feels like another practice test, and you're kind of on autopilot for everything you need to do, which helps against like decision fatigue. So for all the practice exams, I took these on a Saturday just because, again, it was the days I had off on rotations. I would get up at 4:30 and I would just do some type of exercise, right? Whether it was stretching, whether it was some type of cardio or weight combination, just to kind of get my blood moving, turn my brain on. And then I would come back and I would do some Anki reviews. I typically, and we can talk about this in the Anki video, I would typically do a filtered deck based on all of the practice test questions, just make sure I got through those. If I got through those, maybe I'd flip through or do all of my reviews, but it wasn't too many. I think I was doing like 200, 250 by the time I was, at this point. So I do Anki reviews while eating a breakfast, which consists of 6 hard-boiled eggs, 1 cup of black coffee, usually like a big glass of water, and whatever, some vitamins I just take every morning. And like I was saying, I wore the same clothes, so I had this comfortable pair of joggers, this comfortable t-shirt, comfortable socks that I wore for COMLEX 2, Step 2, Level 1, Step 1, same shoes. So literally everything is the same on test day. And then what I would do before I started the test, I would just do a 2 or 3 minute meditation with Headspace. You can get the app for like $9 a year, and it just has like these short little meditations, kind of relax, calm down, getting a good mental space before taking this. And then sometimes I would just take a 5-minute walk outside. When I was taking these exams, I kind of simulated a testing environment. I turned my phone off. It was in a different room. My desk was clear with just a pen, a sheet of paper. I used my headphones, but they weren't turned on, and I kept your keyboard on the desk. I know that sounds stupid, but there's a keyboard on the desk when you actually take it at Prometric. And then in between blocks, I did the same thing. I would just finish the MBMEs typically because the MBMEs just roll into another section. So I would just, come 5 minutes at the end of those blocks, I would just get up and, use the restroom. I had a coffee, a medium coffee. I would sip on some water. And then if I was hungry, more so in the later sections, have a hard-boiled egg. And that's pretty much what I did, just kind of simulate a testing environment, keeping everything the same. Okay, so the days leading up to the test, what I would just do, just some like random nitpicky advice is just wake up early. I wouldn't want to, or I typically didn't, if I stayed up or if I slept in, it was kind of hard for me to fall asleep that night. So I'd get your sleep rhythm really in check, start waking up and going to sleep at the same time, get exercise, just the normal stuff. Don't go crazy and eat like this humongous, crazy fast food meals unless you want to, whatever. Hydrate yourself, spend some time outside. This is just stuff I did. If this is stuff you don't typically do, then just don't do it. Just do your normal stuff. But I definitely recommend getting your sleep cycle in check, just because you don't want to have trouble falling asleep the night before your exam, and you want to wake up feeling, at the same time. And if you keep a rhythm like that, it's going to be easier to do. And, just the day before the test, I had all my coffee ready to go. I had all my snacks, drinks, meals. I had my permit, my ID. I made sure my car was full of gas, And then just content wise, I stopped doing UWorld questions and any questions 2 days before the test. And the final week was super light. So 7 days out from the test, I was doing like maybe 20 questions a day max. I was just doing my Ankis and like 20 questions leading up to the exam. I was doing a lot of relaxing. I was watching more TV, spending a lot more time outside, running around, exercising, stuff I wanted to do. And that's pretty much what I did. I did also the days leading up, which I thought was super helpful. I flipped through the Brodeo MBME cards, especially the pictures, because there's repeats of those. So that was in a sense just reviewing all the MBMEs. And then on test day, it was just, again, it was like the same thing I did on the practice test day. I did the exact same stuff, except this time I had to drive to a testing center. So I left around 7:15. I actually stayed in a hotel since the nearest testing center was like 45 minutes away, and I didn't want to do that drive in the morning. In terms of breaks, I didn't have a plan, of when I was going to take breaks. I knew I was going to get up after every section, to kind of walk, sip water, coffee, use the restroom, but I didn't have like, okay, I get 5 minutes now, 5 minutes here, 3 minutes here. I just took whatever time I needed and just kept an eye on my break time. And I had more than enough break time getting up, in between every block to just sip water and, like I was saying, refresh myself. I took about a 20-minute break around, blocks 5 to 6 because I was starting to get really fatigued. So I took a little longer there. I had hard-boiled eggs at that time because I was also starting to get a little hungry, and same deal, drinking more coffee, water. I wasn't slugging coffee either. I was really sipping these. I probably sipped through like half of a medium-sized coffee by the time the day was done. And that's how I approached it. Just talking about how I felt after the test. So after the USMLE, I knew that thing was hard. I knew it was brutal, but like I felt like it was fair. There was, of course, some crazy ones every block, maybe like 2 or 3 that I would just had absolutely no idea what they were even getting at. But I felt the majority of it was fair. It was stuff that I had seen on the NBMEs and practice questions and Anki, so I really didn't think there was anything out of the blue. COMLEX, blocks 1 to 4, I was cruising. It was hard, but it wasn't awful. I thought it was at least going okay. Blocks 4 to 8, I don't even know what test I was taking. It was horrible. Like, I was flagging 25 of the 40 questions. It got to a point where I was flagging stuff and I just stopped because I'm like, there's no way I'm even going to be able to come back and look at these. But I will say, overall, I felt like a CompSci, and that's how I felt on CompSci 107. Although it went well, I really felt like it was just crazy. The OMM was absolutely wild. I don't even know if there was a correct answer for some of those. The videos were pretty long, and it wasn't just straightforward OMM. It was way more convoluted. Just a laundry list of symptoms, signs and symptoms, and findings. It was really just bizarre and mentally taxing and long. All right, what I would have done differently about, I would have switched NBME 10 and UWorld 2. Like I said, NBME 10 was way more predictive. I feel like you should just see NBME questions before you go into the actual NBME test. UWorld, I kind of feel like they missed the mark a little with their practice test this time around. I thought they weren't, as predictive or online with the real thing. Again, going back to the fatigue thing, you can try and, simulate a longer exam. Like I said, the actual exam was way longer and I was really fatigued by block 6. What you can do here is you can do an NBME and then you can just do 3 timed blocks of UWorld. I know that sounds miserable after, and that will put you at 320 questions, which is pretty much the same amount as full length. USMLE Step 2. You don't even have to do this. What you can do is you could just do an NBME and then you can just do one set of UWorld, timed, and then maybe the next one you do 2 sets of UWorld timed after, just to kind of build up. I mean, I didn't do it. I don't think it's super necessary, but maybe if you're really gassed after some of these NBMEs, just trying to work on your stamina, you can do this. And for practice questions, what I would have done after second year and like kind of my beginning rotation third year, I think you can just start with IM and emergency questions, no matter what rotation you're on. I would save the other ones for the exact rotation, but I think you can do IM and EM throughout the course of your entire year. And there's a lot of those questions, so it would help you trim down on some. Okay, and this is how I did on the NBME CMS forums. You can use these. Again, I didn't really care about the score, to an extent. I just want to get lay eyes on these NBME questions and use them kind of just to see if I was moving in the right direction. And what you can see is I actually started trending down for most of these. I was doing worse as time went on. So any questions, feel free to email me, call me, text me, whatever. I'm going to do another video on how to use the BroDO deck and how to actually buy the CMS forums. So, all right, guys, thanks a lot.